to Jeremy Vine Extra. Now later we're going to be discussing the Fawlty Towers reboot and asking whether a remake can ever be better than the original. I'd like some options and some things that you've enjoyed. But now I am joined by psychologist Professor Nancy Doyle, as well as Roxanne and Richard from ADHD Love, and it's time for Talking Health. Now this section of the show is devoted to answering any questions you might have, and today we're discussing how you can spot the symptoms of ADHD, whether you're noticing things about your own behaviour or in behaviours of your loved ones and children. Hopefully Professor Nancy, Roxanne and Richard will be able to answer any questions you might have or offer some guidance. It's often thought though is something that only affects children struggling to concentrate in classrooms, but over the last 20 years or so adult women have been the fastest rising category for diagnosis. So do you know what some of the symptoms are of ADHD and how you can manage them? Hopefully we're going to be answering some of those questions. Give us a call. 0207 862 2222 is the number. Now, Richard and Roxanne, you've kind of become educators in this, and we're going to speak to you in just a moment on how that all came about. But first of all, let's answer some questions on ADHD itself. So what is it, Dr. Nancy?
ADHD stands for Attention Deficit and Hyperactivity Disorder, which is kind of like taking all of the bad bits and creating a name around all of the bad bits. But really, it's about an attention span that can be kind of all or nothing. So ADHD brains are kind of simultaneously paying attention to way more sounds, images and sensory information than others. And then we kind of find something that we're interested in and we lock on and we can go into hyperfocus, which then means we're actually not paying attention to anything else around us. So it can seem kind of, you know, all or nothing, this kind of dynamic. And then we also tend to have a bit more energy than other people. But there's lots of reasons why that's completely natural. A really healthy part of human communities is to have people who are like that. It's just that it's quite hard for us to sit still at school or in an open plan office and concentrate on one thing. So we've kind of given it this label and this negative vibe, but really it's about a neurodifferent brain that has peaks and troughs.
Does that sound familiar, Roxanne?
It's making me giggle and also want to cry, because hearing you say it in just such a kind way, like that does something to my soul, because it is seen as something so negative and there's a lot of shame attached to it. And I think actually the biggest part of my healing journey, TM, about learning that I have it is to remove that shame and to realise it's okay, my brain works differently. And yes, there's certain things I wish I could do. Like I wish I was more on time, wish I could make the bed, I wish I could shower and clean my teeth every day. Sorry, don't sit too close.
Sorry.
But there's things I can do. Like I write songs and I create and I play in these crazy ways with my stepkids. There's other beautiful things. But so often, I think people, especially those who are late diagnosed, you've lived under shame for so long.
Talk to me about that, because you're a couple. Richard, you don't have ADHD.
I do not, no.
But you kind of discovered the ADHD in moving in together. How did it become obvious that there was something a bit different happening?
I mean, it was really interesting when we first got together, and quite funny actually, because obviously, as with any relationship, there was that honeymoon period, so it was all absolutely fine, all the mess and the chaos and the hurricane that moved in to where I live, but very quickly. And actually, there was probably one thing, you talked about hyperfocus. That was something that really, had we not done the work, had we kind of not learned about it, could have been really quite difficult for me, because it's almost like a shining light. When Rox's attention is on one thing, nothing else exists. So for me, that felt like she was maybe losing interest or something, because when I was the hyperfocus, it was wonderful. There was gifts coming home, there was, you know, all of that sort of stuff and loads of attention. But then after that kind of honeymoon period, it became a bit like, oh, she hasn't texted me all day. This isn't normal. And it was a bit of a learning curve, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And I think without understanding it was ADHD, we might not have made it through. And we talk about that quite a lot, because it was the being late or the forgetting things. It was so easy for him to feel not thought about. And it was so easy for me to feel attacked. And that can just drive you apart.
Then you had a diagnosis, which obviously you've now become educators in this. You make videos for Instagram and TikTok. I think we can actually take a look at one of the videos you've produced.
You hate structure, but you need structure to cope.
Yep.
You need a clean environment to focus, but you can't clean.
Yep.
You got loads of creative ideas, but you can't execute any of them.
Yes, sir.
So it's like you've got two different brains working at the same time.
Yeah, I do. It's tough.
That's such a great description. I think that makes it very, very clear. Are you happy with that one? Do you think that?
I'm absolutely happy with it. It's great content, and it really sums it up in a very relatable way. It's
in a very
perfect.
positive way as well. Well, we're going to take a call now. This is Melanie from Northumberland. Melanie, what's your question or your query for us?
Hello. My question is, it took a while for granddaughter to be diagnosed, and now we have to wait a while for her to consultant. So in the meantime, I'd like to know how we can help her as parents, grandparents, and how we can support her in any way.
Well, I suppose both of you can answer that from different perspectives, but we'll start with Professor Nancy. What advice would you give?
So I'm assuming that one of the things you're waiting for is potentially some medication and to try out medication.
Yeah.
I think, medication is a big issue for ADHD, as some of us absolutely find it, the difference that makes the difference, and others don't. And so, those who don't find that one of the most important things for managing ADHD is sleep. So really, really thinking about, what needs to happen for that little... Sorry, did you say it's a boy or a girl? I didn't hear the... Okay, so for her to get to sleep at night, how can you really support good sleep hygiene? And, it's going to take a bit longer sometimes, and it might be more stressful getting to bed, but kind of working with that, not getting annoyed about it, thinking about things like listening to calm music while you're in bed, things like a weighted blanket, stuff like that will really help them settle down and calm. Because, I'm an ADHDer as well, and I'm sure Rox will agree with me, sleep is sometimes the be-all and end-all. We cannot manage without sleep. We really have to think about that.
Roxanne was nodding along.
Yeah.
What other advice could you give, though? When you were a child, can you remember what your parents or what your grandparents could have done to support you or to help you?
Yeah, I think I was, and it was a very different time. It was in the 80s, and we know so much more now. But I was sort of labelled as a bit naughty and a bit destructive, and I kind of took that on throughout my whole life, which unfortunately led to some pretty dark places. So just for the caller, it's really letting your kid know that they're okay and that they're loved just the way they are. And something that has helped me so much, and it's a little embarrassing to say on TV, but I will say it, is I have never been able to make my bed, with loads of other things as well, but make my bed, and I've been so embarrassed. So how can you be a 36-year-old woman with a fairly decent job who stands in front of a bed going, oh, I can't do it? And then I met him, and he never ever judged me. He can make a bed. He should work in a hotel. And what he did was say, has anyone ever shown you? I said, no. He stood with me. He went through every process. I took notes, like you take the pillows off first. I didn't know. And now I have learnt, and I can do it. So those simple things like cleaning teeth or making a bed or waking up, having somebody with you, not judging you, not assuming that you might know how to do it, just be there and just make life a little bit easier.
I think Melanie, I hope that really helps. We've got another call. I just want to make sure we get through and give as much advice as we can. Carrie from Fife, what's your question?
I've got a question. My son, he went to primary school, and the primary school thought he had ADHD. Well, now he's at high school, and the school's actually challenging me to say they think he's got ADHD. They're going around all the classrooms, they're asking the classrooms about it. They said, because his mannerism, how he can't look them in the eye, he's just... and I just thought he was a hyper child like me. I'm a very hyper person, and I just thought he was like his mum. So I just need to understand a little bit more, because I don't understand it.
That's interesting. I wonder, Carrie's saying, and your son's been diagnosed with ADHD?
No, the primary school tried to say he had it, and now the high school is asking me to get him assessed to see if he does have it, because they think he's a very hyper child.
So, Professor Nancy, what's the next step then for Carrie? Who does she need to contact?
She needs to go and speak to her GP, and a good idea would be to take to the GP a kind of list of the symptoms and the differences that the school are saying they notice, and perhaps similar for yourself, if you notice things at home where he's unable to concentrate, if he's got sort of seeming more energetic than other children his age, if it's anything that seems kind of unusual for his age, write all that down, make some notes, and go and talk to your GP and ask for an assessment. The assessment itself is quite, you know, they're not going to misdiagnose him as definitely having it if he doesn't. So you don't need to worry about that. And also, it doesn't go straight from have a diagnosis, you must get medicated. It's sometimes just a really good way to start a conversation with school about things he can cope with and can't cope with. I mean, school is kryptonite for a lot of ADHDers. I mean, I might be a professor now, but when I was 12, I wasn't going to school at all because of my ADHD. And so there's things that schools do with ADHD is they let us have kind of decompression rooms where we can go and have a little break from the sensory overwhelm. They might give us a bit more structure. They might give us a bit more, bit more flexibility around deadlines for pieces of work. He might be able to do his exams in a quiet room where he's not been distracted by everyone else. So if he has got it, it can be really helpful for making the difference for educational outcomes.
By the sounds of it, it is quite important to get a diagnosis then, so please do that, Carrie. Thank you very much for your call. We're going to speak to Brenda now from Bradford. What's your question?
Hiya. I just don't know how to find out about getting my grandson assessed, whether he's got ADHD. He just can focus on one thing at a time. He doesn't seem to have no memory. We just lost. We've been to the GP. They suggested tablets, and he's just acting like he's 21, but he seems like a young boy, about 8 years old. I don't know what's happened with him.
Is that sounding familiar?
Yeah, and also, so there's a bit of your brain, the front of your brain, called the prefrontal cortex, which is the last bit of your brain to finish growing up. And it doesn't grow up until we're about 23, 24, 25. And for ADHDers, it's that bit of the brain which tends to be the problem. That's where our struggles come from. And so actually 21 can be a really critical age because he can seem really out of step with his peers. They might be seeming to be much more mature and getting on with things. But actually for ADHDers, it tends to be more like 23, 24, 25 when that part of our brain stops growing and finishes and becomes mature, that actually we can start growing up a bit then. So I would say, don't worry, don't give him a hard time, hang in there. And if he's still really struggling in a few years' time, then maybe revisit going to the doctor and thinking about that medication. But certainly early 20s can be a real difficult time for ADHDers. We see our friends growing up, we see them able to do things that we're not able to do, like hold down jobs and finish education courses, and you know it can be really upsetting for us. So just stick with it.
Brenda,
he might come good.
Thank you very much for your call. Does that sound familiar to you?
So familiar.
I kind of see from the corner of my eye you're nodding along.
But just hearing it back, I can feel shame lifting from my shoulders because, you know, when I was 21, I was leaving uni. I had terrible attendance. I managed to blag a 2-1 because of that hyper-focus. But then all my friends got jobs, got wives, settled down, and there I was still at 30, renting a spare room off someone on my 8th job, just feeling like utterly broken and so much shame. Like, it just happened later.
So the more we talk about this and the more people understand it, the easier it is for people with ADHD, presumably.
Oh, absolutely, because if I could have heard you speaking when I was younger, it probably would have saved me 15 years of really, really difficult life. And I think that's why it's so important to speak about, because it is the changing jobs, it's the problems with personal hygiene, the problem with finances. I got myself into 40 grand's worth of debt.
Oh,
that can be a very dark place.
I think it's important for the other person, whether they be neurotypical or whatever, because obviously you've done a huge amount of work and understanding and removing that shame. But actually, if your loved ones, so whether that be a parent, carer, partner, is criticising what they would deem to be simple behaviour and messing up, like it's impossible to grow, I guess. So both sides of that coin are probably huge.
Well, on that note, I wish we could speak about this forever, but at least we've done a bit to speak about it, and you guys are doing amazing work, all of you. So a huge thank you to Professor Nancy and also to Roxanne and Richard for coming on and joining us. We hope some of that advice helped you at home. You can find more online by searching ADHD Love, and we're going to move on now, unfortunately. After the break, though, we are discussing Fawlty Towers. If you're a huge fan of this, it's getting remade. There's a reboot, but can remakes ever be any better than the original? 0207 862 2222 is the number. We'll speak to you right after this. Today marks